Howdy folks, Dominic here. Once again, this episode is not suitable for all audiences. We are going to discuss ancient Egyptian swear words, ways of insulting people that appear in their texts. And I'm going to engage with this frankly, including the modern equivalents of these words, and how you might use them if you wanted to insult somebody. I guess we are in our not safe for work era this month, but if you'd rather not hear this kind of language, this is your chance to step off the ride. Thank you. Number 1. An insult. Let's start mild with fool or to be foolish. This is wecha in Egyptian. The surviving texts usually describe foolishness more in a negation, as in, I am not a fool. It occurs, for instance, in the tale of the shipwrecked sailor, where the crew of the vessel are all described as being quite competent. And to explain that, they say, there was not a fool among them, nen wecha em. And in the teachings of Mary Carre that tell how to be a good king, we hear, quote, the ruler of the 2 river banks, the king, is intelligent. He will not act foolishly. If you wanted to call somebody a fool directly, you might say netek wecha, or if you were speaking about somebody else, you might say netef wecha, he is a fool, or netes wecha, she is a fool. If you preferred a more self-deprecating approach, you could say inek wecha, I am a fool. Or perhaps you thought your government were fools, a fairly popular critique. In that case, you could say netsen wechau, they are fools. Or finally, perhaps you were battling a troublesome Jedi, and you wanted to inform him that your master, Count Dooku, had trained you in their Jedi arts. In that scenario, you might say, wechau, you seba ni emkat Jedi mchatia Dooku. It's a niche circumstance, and so uncivilized. But now you are prepared. Anyway, fool is pretty mild as far as insults go. Let's say that there is somebody you really dislike, just an unpleasant, petty, weak-spirited individual who causes suffering or menet for his own benefit and gain. If such a deplorable person were to ever exist, the Egyptians might describe them as vile or wretched. The word for this is chessi. Chessi shows up a lot in military narratives, usually contrasted with the heroic Egyptian king. In the Battle of Kadesh, for example, Ramesses II describes his enemy, the king of the Hittites, as Pa Chessi Chatti, the wretched one of Chatti. Again, you could use the insult as follows. He or she is vile. Netef or netes chessi. You are vile. Netek chessi. And I am vile. Inek chessi. But be kind to yourself and don't say that. Of course, many vile people are also liars, for which you might call somebody a gergi. To be a liar, gergi, or to speak falsehood, isfet, was a moral crime in ancient Egyptian belief. After all, the very foundation of Ma'at, the cosmic order, is that there was an objective truth and order to the universe. It was an order created by the gods and upheld or maintained by the king. From that foundation, to speak falsely, to contradict the divinely ordained truth, Ma'at, was necessarily a great crime. The concept is not abstract either. In legal cases, people might promise that they would speak truthfully, ma'at, and that if they were found to be a liar, or gergi, they might be punished quite severely. Also, in stories, you will find the concepts of truth and falsehood sometimes given personalities and actually clashing with one another. That is a story we'll explore in the future. The point is, a liar is called a gergi. Now, let's start to get into the more extreme things. In English, a common way to insult an annoying person is to call them a dick, or a dickhead in New Zealand, Australia, and the UK. The Egyptians don't have an exact analogy for this phrase, but the word for penis is chenen. So if you'd like to call someone a dick, you have to go slightly technical. But you could say, netek chenen, you dick. Next, we have the most simple expletive. The Egyptian word for shit is fegen. This is also the verb to defecate. Next, we have a couple of generally bad deeds or states of being. To call somebody evil or bad, you would say jo. To describe a crime, it is aja or bin. And a criminal is a niku or a kher. These are general words that don't show up that often, but you can use them to describe negative situations, or perhaps people. Next, we have a word that in my culture is the strongest expletive. The ancient Egyptians do not have an exact version for cunt, but they do have an expression that conveys a similar form of gynecological derogation. To begin, the words for vagina are kenes and kat. Kat seems to be more common, and in some stories, like The Tale of Two Brothers from the New Kingdom, a woman doing bad things is described as a kat tahut. It's a strange phrase that does not have an exact translation, but literally means something along the lines of badly behaving vagina. As you can imagine, male scholars have had trouble with this one. The first major interpretation was that the term kat tahut somehow related to menstruation, because clearly that's the worst thing a vagina can do. More recently, the phrasing has been re-examined, especially in the literary context, and the new argument goes that kat tahut actually relates more to moral concerns rather than physical. Within the tale, the person who is described as a kat tahut is behaving adulterously and deceitfully. In that sense, and without going too deeply into morality, the phrase kat tahut might be a way to describe somebody whose behavior you find reprehensible. If you want to extrapolate that in a similar way that vagina has become cunt as an insult, you could call someone a kat tahut. But if you wanted to keep it simple and punchy, you could probably get away with kat. Finally, we have the world's best and most versatile curse word, fuck. Again, it's one that we have to use a more technical term. The ancient Egyptian word for copulating, having sex, is nek. It's written roughly the same for the verb fucking and for the participle fucker. Alas, as far as I can tell from the texts, the Egyptians never used a phrase exactly like fuck you. But they did have a particularly colourful variation. In several texts from the New Kingdom, we have the phrase nek su aa. This translates as, may a donkey fuck you. It shows up in the context of oaths and promises. That is, if somebody breaks their oath or goes against their promise, may this punishment happen to them. Surprisingly, we find this phrase in quite serious documents, including a will or bequest. A papyrus, commonly known as the adoption papyrus, describes an arrangement in which one person is adopting another in order to bequeath their estate. We find a demand that if anyone violates the oath or agreement, may a donkey fuck him or his wife. It certainly goes above and beyond a simple fuck you. It's a little bit wordy, so it doesn't quite have the same punch, but if somebody was annoying you generally and you wanted to throw a heinous wish at them, you could say nek su aa. Alternatively, we can reverse engineer the English back to the Egyptian and present fuck you as nektu. Or, for the more elaborate nek su aa, you could make it punchier by running it together, neksua, and perhaps you'll get the point. Either way, this is how you give your fucks. This brings us to the end of the swear words that I was able to find within ancient texts and modern dictionaries. As you can imagine, these are not the sort of words that tend to get written down, especially in tombs or temples, so it's kind of remarkable that they survive at all in many respects. It's definitely one of those questions that, if I had a time machine, I would quite like to go back and record. For now, this is a brief introduction to ancient Egyptian swear words and curses. I hope you've enjoyed. A quick side note before we finish. The phrase nek su a'a, may a donkey fuck you, is best known from a papyrus. This document was translated and published by Alan Gardner, one of the greats of 20th century Egyptology. Gardner translated and published this papyrus in 1941, the height of the Second World War, when the UK, where he lived and worked, was experiencing regular bombing raids by the air forces of Third Reich Germany. Gardner lived through that experience, and he opens his publication with an evocative nod to circumstances. Beginning his article, Gardner says, quote, "In these catastrophic days, I feel it undesirable to postpone any longer the publication of an exceptionally interesting papyrus which I acquired some years ago." He also notes that the papyrus itself is, quote, "at present buried, for safety's sake, some 40 feet below ground," end quote. Little details like this have nothing to do with the swear words, but they do remind us that scholarship never happens in a vacuum. Even a field like ancient history, that seems so disconnected from modern times, must bow to the circumstances of the day. And when it came to fascism in the 1940s, truly, no one, and no papyrus, was safe. When publishing this article, including its phrase, nek su a'a, may a donkey fuck you, Gardner was a little bit too squeamish to translate it as fully as we might like. To his credit, he did not censor the phrase, he simply rendered it more technically as, may a donkey copulate with the wrongdoer. And in the footnotes he remarks, quote, "This obscene curse is not uncommon in oaths of the Ramesside period and later." For several examples, see an earlier article. But the Berlin Dictionary, the Wörterbuch, fails to cite this expression, end quote. It's probably reading a bit too far into the historical context to suggest that that was a quiet dig at the scholars working in Berlin, on the other side as it were. But Gardner's note is a good example of how academics of the early 20th century varied in their approach to this kind of foul language. Some dealt with it openly, although in the most polite phrasing they could. Others simply ignored it to preserve decorum. At any rate, if there is any group that I'm sure we and Gardner can all agree to insult, it is the leaders of the Third Reich. Those guys were genuine chenenu. If I were to describe that government, I would say netzen chesi. Every single one of them behaved like a kat tachut, and their leader was a true wecha, who paid the price for his stupidity, but dragged millions with him into the abyss of evil, or Zhou. May those warlords suffer the indignities of our final, most evocative insult. To the Nazis, let us say, nek su a'a. A final note. Going back to fool or foolish, I was playing around a bit with General Grievous in ancient Egyptian. Incidentally, that character would be known as Imira Mesha Necha. Imira Mesha being general or overseer of troops, and Necha meaning contrary, perverse, or terrible. I don't know why I got stuck on Grievous of all people, but it's a fun way to use ancient Egyptian.
Wehau, you Seba in the Mkat Jedi, Mchatiaduku.